True horror stories don't always wait for midnight to find you. Sometimes they come for you in the last pale light of the afternoon, and they bring something with them that no one can explain. Welcome to 3 a.m. Horror Audio. Tonight we have two stories, both sent in by listeners, both set in the same corner of Nigeria, and both happening not in the dead of night, but in broad daylight and at dusk. That's what makes these so deeply unsettling, because we always tell ourselves, I'll be fine, it's still light out. After tonight, you might not be so sure about that anymore. Let's get into it. Story 1. The Pond, the Fish, and the Thing in the Tree. There's a neighborhood on the outskirts of Maiduguri in Borno State, northeastern Nigeria, a place locals simply call Abu Bakar's compound. Now, that name has a history behind it. Years ago, going back further than most people around there can remember, that entire stretch of land was home to a tight-knit community of traders, prosperous families, people who had built real lives there. Over time, as things shifted politically and socially across the region, those families gradually relocated. Some went north, some went further west, and when they left in a hurry. One of those families, and this is the part that matters, were goldsmiths. Serious ones. They didn't just wear gold, they traded it, moved significant quantities of it. And back then, there were no bank vaults in that part of the country, no safety deposit boxes, no digital records. So what did you do with your valuables when you had to move fast? You buried them, or you sank them. The story passed down through generations in that neighborhood is that this family hid gold throughout the property before they left, in the soil, in the walls of old structures, and according to the elders, in the ponds. There used to be 3 ponds on that land. Now there's 1. And over the years, people in the area have found things. Small gold rings, a buried clay pot with jewelry inside, even what some described as a small gold bar. Nobody could fully explain it. Some said it was the hidden wealth of the old trading families. Other, and this is where it gets darker, said it was something else entirely, that the gold belonged to spirits, that whatever lived in that land had claimed those riches as their own. The one remaining pond is unusual, not in the way that most haunted ponds are described, the kind that never dry up, that seem bottomless, that pump out water no matter the season. No, this pond behaves almost normally. It dries up in the dry season, turns to thick mud and silt by late summer, fills back up when the rains come, ordinary on the surface. But the things that happen near it, those are anything but ordinary. Our story begins in 2011 in the early evening hours, just before the Maghrib call to prayer. The 2 people at the center of this story are a woman named Sakina and her nephew, Kamaru. They live together and work together, raising livestock, cattle, goats, a few chickens. It was their livelihood, and by all accounts, it was a decent one. They sold milk. They sold goats at the market. When the time came, they sold cattle. Simple, honest work. That evening, Kamaru, as he almost always did, had a large silver cooking pot with him. Big, heavy thing. He brought it everywhere. It came in handy for carrying things when they were out with the animals. Now their grazing land sat beyond Abu Bakar's compound. To get there quickly, they had a shortcut. A path that cut through a dense thicket of brush, past the old pond, and out into a wide open field on the other side. Most people avoided that path. They'd take the long way around rather than walk through that thicket, but Sakina and Kamaru knew the land well enough, and they were in a hurry. The sky was getting orange. They'd already brought the cattle home earlier, but several goats were still out in that field and needed to be brought back before dark. They took the shortcut. They moved quickly through the brush, trading small talk, probably thinking more about supper than anything else. And then Kamaru stopped walking. Sakina nearly ran into him. "What is it?" she started to say, and then she saw it too. The pond, dry as cracked leather just weeks before, had a thin layer of muddy water sitting in the basin. And in that shallow, murky water, it was full of snakehead fish. If you've never seen a snakehead, called gajera in the local dialect, picture a long, muscular, prehistoric-looking fish. They can grow enormous. And what Sakina and Kamaru were staring at was dozens of them, massive ones, writhing and churning in the shallow water, packed in so tight the surface of the pond looked like it was boiling. Now, you have to understand something about human nature in that moment. The goats? Forgotten. Getting home before dark? Forgotten. These were livestock farmers. They knew the value of a good catch, and a pond full of enormous snakeheads practically begging to be grabbed? That was a windfall. That was weeks of market income flopping around right in front of them. Without another word, both of them climbed down into the pond. The mud sucked at their feet. The fish were slippery, incredibly slippery, slithering right out of their hands. But they kept grabbing, kept loading fish into that big silver pot. And the strange thing was, no matter how many they put in, the pot kept taking more, far more than should have fit. Fish after fish after fish, and the pot wasn't full. Until suddenly, it was. They hauled the pot up out of the pond together, one on each handle. Heavy, good and heavy, the way a pot full of big fish should be. They looked back at the water, still churning with dozens more, and they felt that familiar pang. We're leaving so much behind, but there was nothing to be done. They turned toward home and started walking. They hadn't gone more than 30 feet. Kamaru said it first. "Does this feel light to you?" Sakina frowned, shifted her grip. Yeah. They both stopped and looked into the pot at the same time. The fish were still there. The pot was still full. But those enormous, thick-bodied snakeheads, each one had been the length of a man's forearm, were gone. In their place, squirming in the bottom of the pot, were tiny fish, 4 inches, 5 inches maybe, like fingerlings, like juveniles, like they had somehow shrunk. The two of them stared at each other for a long, silent moment. And then, without a single word spoken between them, they understood. This wasn't a lucky catch. This wasn't natural. Sakina set her side of the pot down. Kamaru did the same. They left it right there in the dirt and started moving fast toward home. That's when they heard the sound from above. Perfect, continuing exactly in the same voiceover ready format, same structure, no extra formatting, and keeping your flow intact. There was a tall palm tree standing along the path. Enormous thing, leaning slightly, its fronds maybe 40 feet up. And as they moved beneath it, something came down out of it. Not jumping, not falling, descending. It moved with a kind of controlled, deliberate slowness that made it worse, because falling would have been frightening. But this felt intentional, like it had been waiting up there, like it had watched them at the pond and decided, now. It landed directly in their path and stood upright. Sakina and Kamaru both froze. The figure was tall, darker than the surrounding shadows, a deep, consuming black, like a hole cut into the evening air. The face. Neither of them could make out clearly, but the hands and the feet, the claws, long, curved. So long they bent forward at the tips like hooks, and in the last gray light of the evening, those claws caught what little light remained and glinted, sharp and bright, the way a blade glints, the kind of sharp that doesn't need to be described in detail. You look at something like that, and some ancient animal part of your brain sends one message. Do not let that touch you. The figure made a sound, low, resonant, almost vibrational, like it was coming from inside your own chest rather than from outside. A deep, rhythmic hum. And Sakina and Kamaru could not move, not an inch. Their bodies had simply stopped responding, like every muscle had seized at once. They stood there locked in place, and then they noticed something else. It had been a bright evening, still plenty of light when they left the pond. But now, darkness. Not the gradual dark of sunset. not the soft dimming of dusk. Instant blackness, like someone had thrown a cloth over the world, as if the presence of that figure had eaten the remaining light. They stood there, frozen, unable to speak, unable to run, unable to even look away, for what felt like an eternity. Probably less than a minute, but those were not normal seconds. Then Sakina found her voice. It came out ragged and raw, more a scream than a word, but it was sound, and Kamaru matched it a half-second later, both of them crying out into the dark. Now, as luck or fate or something else entirely would have it, a woman named Ngozi lived in a house at the edge of that thicket. She'd stepped outside for a moment just to get some air. It wasn't late yet, barely dusk, nothing unusual about being outside. And she heard the screaming. Ngozi knew this land. She knew the stories about the pond and the old trees along that path. She wasn't naive about what the darkness near Abu Bakr's compound was capable of, but she was also, by all accounts, a woman of remarkable steadiness. Hey, who's there? Hold on, I'm coming. Don't be scared. She was already moving toward them, calling out as she walked, and then she got close enough to see. She stopped. From behind, she couldn't make out the figure's face, but she could see its outline. Tall, unnaturally still, standing in the middle of the path, and she could see those hands, those claws. Ngozi screamed. Her son was inside. He heard it and came out running, grabbing the first thing he could find, a long metal rod, shouting, "Thief! Thief! Come out, wherever you are!" His shouting brought neighbors out. People came with machetes, with tools, with flashlights cutting through the dark. And by the time the first of them reached the path, the figure was gone, just gone. They found Sakina and Kamaru standing exactly where they'd frozen, shaking, unable to speak for several minutes. When they finally could talk, they described what they'd seen, and Ngozi confirmed it from her own angle, from behind. 3 separate witnesses, 1 story. Later, someone went back to the spot where the pot had been left. It was still there. The tiny fish were gone, not a trace. Just the empty pot sitting in the dirt. The goats, for the record, were fine. Someone else brought them home. Sakina and Kamaru both ran fevers in the days that followed. They recovered slowly without any dramatic intervention. Just rest in time and the company of people who knew enough not to ask too many questions. They're still in the area today, still remembered for this story. And if you're ever near the edge of that thicket at dusk and you see a pond full of fish that shouldn't be there, leave them alone. Just leave them alone. Interlude. Before we move to the second story, I want to point something out because it's easy to miss. Neither of these stories happened in complete darkness. The first one, it happened at dusk, before evening prayer. There was still light in the sky when that thing came down from the palm tree. In fact, the darkness came with it. The second story I'm about to tell you, it happened in the middle of the afternoon. Think about that for a second. We condition ourselves to feel safer when the sun is up. We think the rules change in daylight. We think whatever waits in the dark is bound by the dark. It isn't. Story 2. Do not dress the body. This story was sent to us by a listener named Hassan. And I want to be clear, this didn't happen years ago. This happened 3 to 4 months back. At a well-known private hospital in Port Harcourt, Rivers State, Nigeria, where Hassan works in a medical support role, he wanted people to know what happened to him. He's still dealing with the aftermath as we speak. Part of Hassan's job, something that rotates through his department, is what the hospital calls death care. Not an autopsy, not anything forensic. Simply this: when a patient passes away and the body needs minor wound dressing before it's transferred or released to the family, someone has to do it. Wrap the wounds, clean the area. Simple clinical work. Simple, that is, when the patient is alive. For the dead, It requires a different kind of nerve. One night, a woman was brought in after suffering a severe stroke. She was elderly. She'd been in treatment at the hospital for some time. That night, she passed away quietly in her room. She needed dressing on her head. The stroke had left some visible external trauma. Protocol was clear. A female staff member should handle the death care for a female patient. But that night, the ward was stretched thin. The nurses qualified for this task were already occupied with an emergency on another floor. Every available woman on the team was tied up. So the duty fell to Hassan. He accepted the assignment without hesitation. He'd done work like this before, many times. He was experienced, professional, not easily rattled. He collected the body. It was covered with a bed sheet the family had brought, transferred her to a stretcher, and began wheeling her down the corridor toward the death care room. The hallway was quiet. He could see other staff members at a distance, but he was essentially alone with the stretcher, moving at a steady pace. And then, about halfway down the corridor, something changed. His body got heavy. Not tired heavy, not the kind of heaviness you feel after a long shift. This was a sudden, pressing weight, like the air itself had thickened around him. His legs didn't want to move forward. His head started to swim, a low, disorienting buzz behind his eyes. He told himself it was exhaustion. He leaned forward against the stretcher to push more effectively, and in doing so, his head dipped lower, and the dead woman's right foot made contact with his forehead. Just a brush, a graze, almost accidental. The effect was immediate, a jolt, like touching a live wire, electric. It crackled through him from the point of contact straight down through his spine, and then his right leg erupted in pain, severe, sudden, deep, like something had clenched around the bone. He kept moving, barely. He made it to the death care room, set the stretcher in position, steadied himself against the wall for a moment, and then he pulled back the bedsheet. That's when he heard it, a voice, not in the room, not behind him, not from any direction he could identify, inside his ear, close, like someone had leaned in to whisper from 2 inches away. "You're not going to dress this body, are you?" Hassan went still. He looked around. No one was there. He told himself it was in his head. He reached for his supplies. "You're not going to dress this body, are you?" Again, same voice, same closeness. He looked around again. Still nothing. He took a breath. He had a job to do. There was no one else. He worked quickly, professionally, completed the head dressing, recovered the body, and wheeled the stretcher back out into the hallway. That part went smoothly enough. His legs still ached, but it had dulled to a manageable throb. He brought the body to the ward station and was told the family couldn't take the body yet. There was an outstanding bill, a large one. The family had been notified but wouldn't arrive until morning. The body needed to go to the morgue. Hassan wheeled the stretcher through the hospital's lower-level corridors, down toward the body holding room. As he got closer, that heaviness returned, his body thickening again with each step, like walking into deeper water. He entered the morgue, found the correct compartment, one of the small refrigerated units set into the wall, and transferred the body inside. Before closing the unit, he took the folded bed sheet and placed it neatly on the woman's chest. It would be needed in the morning when the family came to take her. Just before 4 in the morning, his supervisor found him. "Good news. The family settled the account. They want to take her now." Hassan went back to the morgue. He entered the body holding room, and something felt wrong immediately. His mind went sideways, not dizzy exactly. More like the edges of his awareness went soft. He could see the room. He could see the compartment. He knew where he was, but there was a disconnection between himself and his own actions, like watching his hands work from a slight distance. Half asleep, half present. He opened the compartment. The bed sheet he'd folded neatly and placed on the body's chest was crumpled. Not shifted, crumpled. The way you crumple a piece of paper before throwing it away. Like someone had grabbed it, balled it in their fist, and tossed it back. Like something had moved it. Hassan stared at it. He registered it. He knew it was wrong. And then, In that hazy, half-ear state, he unfolded the sheet, refolded it, placed it back on the body. Then, remembering the family was waiting, he opened it again and laid it flat over the body instead. He wheeled the stretcher out of the morgue. By the time he reached the corridor, his head had cleared somewhat. By the time he reached the family, gathered near the hospital entrance, dressed for a long night, he felt almost normal again. One of the family members stepped forward. "Can we see her face? Just for a moment." Hassan reached down and folded back the top of the sheet, and the world stopped. His body locked, completely. Every single voluntary muscle, frozen. He couldn't blink. He couldn't turn his head. He couldn't speak. He stood there with the sheet folded back, staring forward, absolutely rigid, like someone had hit a switch and cut the power to every moving part of him. He could hear the family talking. He could see them in his peripheral vision. Confused now, concerned. He could feel the floor under his feet. His mind was fully awake and aware. He just could not move. "Sir, are you all right?" Nothing. "Hello? What's wrong?" He wanted desperately to answer. He formed the words in his mind, pushed them toward his mouth. Nothing came out. He stood there like a statue, eyes fixed, while the family exchanged alarmed glances. His colleagues noticed. 2 of them rushed over. When they touched his arms, something shifted, just barely, like the grip on him loosened a few degrees, enough that he could shuffle, slowly, stiffly away from the stretcher. Each step felt like he was dragging weights attached to each ankle.
By the time he reached the corridor, his head had cleared somewhat. By the time he reached the family, gathered near the hospital entrance dressed for a long night, he felt almost normal again. One of the family members stepped forward. "Can we see her face? Just for a moment." Hassan reached down and folded back the top of the sheet, and the world stopped, his body locked, completely, every single voluntary muscle frozen. He couldn't blink. He couldn't turn his head. He couldn't speak. He stood there with the sheet folded back, staring forward, absolutely rigid, like someone had hit a switch and cut the power to every moving part of him. He could hear the family talking. He could see them in his peripheral vision, confused now, concerned. He could feel the floor under his feet. His mind was fully awake and aware. He just could not move. "Sir, are you all right?" Nothing. "Hello? What's wrong?" He wanted desperately to answer. He formed the words in his mind, pushed them toward his mouth. Nothing came out. He stood there like a statue, eyes fixed, while the family exchanged alarmed glances. His colleagues noticed. 2 of them rushed over. When they touched his arms, something shifted, just barely, like the grip on him loosened a few degrees, enough that he could shuffle, slowly, stiffly, away from the stretcher. Each step felt like he was dragging weights attached to each ankle. He reached a quiet corner of the hallway and turned to his coworkers. He couldn't speak. He couldn't explain. He pointed, and through a combination of gestures finally communicated what he needed: a Quran and a prayer mat. They brought him a pen and paper. He wrote it down because his fingers were curling, stiffening involuntarily as he gripped the pen, like his own hand was fighting him. They understood. They moved quickly. He stood. He raised his hands for the opening of prayer, and he began. Each position brought relief, incremental, measurable. The bowing, his body felt fractionally lighter. The prostration, lighter still. Rising from the prostration, lighter. The second prostration, more. He moved through 2 complete units of prayer, and by the end of it, most of the weight was gone. He began to recite from the Quran. At first, barely anything came out, a dry rasp. Slowly, the words formed. The voice came back. He recited until the call to Fajr prayer at dawn. After Fajr, he could speak. The first person he sought out was the nurse who had originally been assigned to dress the body, the one who'd handed the job off to him that night. She listened to his account, and then she told him something that made his skin crawl. She said that when she had looked at that body, her heart rate had spiked terrifyingly, like a pressure had clamped down on her chest, like her heart was going to stop. An overwhelming, sourceless dread, the kind that doesn't come from thought, but from somewhere deeper and older. She said she had made an excuse, found a reason to leave, and had not gone back. She couldn't explain it. She just knew, the moment she looked at that woman, she could not be in the room with her. Hassan went home after his shift. He slept. The dreams were bad. Expected, maybe, given the night he'd had. He wrote those off. But the following night, when he was home, in his own bedroom, nowhere near the hospital, he woke up in the small hours, and there was a figure in his room, standing near the wall, moving, slowly back and forth, sitting on the edge of the chair, then rising, then crossing to the other side of the room, then back, pacing, silent, no sound of footsteps, just there. He told himself he'd woken from a nightmare. He closed his eyes, tried to settle. The next night he was home. Same thing. And the night after that. Always the same figure. Always the same unhurried pacing. Always silent. Always gone before morning. It wasn't a dream. He knew the difference by now. Hassan eventually went to a trusted Islamic scholar and healer in his community. After listening to the full account, the man performed a spiritual cleansing, recitation, specific prayers, a formal ruqya. Hassan says it helped, significantly, but it didn't end. Today, months later, whenever his work route takes him past the door of that morgue, his body gets heavy, that same pressing weight coming down on him from nowhere. And in those moments, he says, he no longer feels alone. He feels accompanied, like something is walking alongside him, matching him step for step, without making a sound. And sometimes, in his sleep, he sees the figure again. He doesn't know what that woman's story really was, whether she died simply of a stroke, or whether something was attached to her already, whether she knew in those last seconds that something had followed her in. He doesn't know why the whisper warned him not to dress the body, or what would have happened if he hadn't. He says thinking about it too deeply makes things worse, so he tries not to. He just keeps praying, and he keeps the lights on. 2 stories, both in daylight or close to it, both in places that looked perfectly ordinary, a pond on a dry afternoon, a hospital hallway under fluorescent lights. Neither location announced itself as dangerous. Neither victim had any reason to believe that day would stay with them for the rest of their lives. That's what I keep coming back to. We build up these mental images of when and where the unexplainable is allowed to happen. Late at night, abandoned buildings, cemeteries, dense forests at midnight. But Sakina and Kamaru were bringing goats home before supper. Hassan was pushing a stretcher down a lit corridor. Ordinary moments, ordinary tasks. And something interrupted. Whatever is out there, whatever moves in the spaces between what we can see and what we can't, it doesn't wait for the right atmosphere. It doesn't wait for you to be scared first. It just arrives. Stay aware out there and stay safe. This has been 3 AM Horror Audio, where the stories are real and the darkness is never as far away as you think. If tonight's episode got under your skin, do us a favor, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a new story. We drop new episodes regularly, and every single one comes straight from real people, real experiences, real fear. And if you have a story, something that happened to you, or someone you know, something that kept you up at night and still doesn't have an explanation, send it to us. The submission email is in the description below. Written or recorded, we accept both. Your story could be the one that leaves our next listener sleeping with the lights on. Until next time, don't ignore the whispers. 3 a.m. Horror Audio. We'll be here when you can't sleep. "3 a.m. Horror Audio. We'll be here when you can't sleep."